Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues. Episode 199, IO Conclusions Continued. If the dialogue isn't a critique of poetry, what is it? The three analogies purporting to show that Io is divinely inspired and therefore lacking techne are not philosophical arguments. They are not even arguments at all. And the main point is that Io himself isn't convinced. He points out after them that he thinks that he's put in a lot of work. We may imagine he's spent hours learning thousands of lines of Homer, and therefore he is justified in thinking that he has a techne. The only problem is he may not understand what the techne is that he has. The fact that he has learnt thousands of lines might suggest to him that he has learnt subject matter. In a way he has. He's learnt the lines, but he has not learned fishing, medicine, even leading an army. Furthermore, if a techne involved merely the body of knowledge, the subject matter of the techne, there would be no difference between the poet and the rhapsode. The poet also knows those lines. The difference is that the poet knows how to construct poetry, but the rhapsode knows how to convey poetry to an audience. In other words, the techne involves not only the lines of poetry, but the method involved in reaching a particular goal. The poet has to learn how to construct poetry with a goal of constructing poetry. The rhapsode learns how to perform. The lines are the matter, the subject matter which he has to convey, but the techne involves the method required to reach a particular goal, which is to make the audience receive the poem in the way that the poet intended. At least that is the way the rhapsode would interpret the way that the poet intended. Thus, the rather fanciful analogies are not intended to convince Io of anything, but to bring out in him his notion that he does have a techne, because he has worked hard to achieve what he is able to do. And the fact that he wins prizes all the time, this is another element in his criterion for being a good rhapsode. His techne, therefore, is a body of knowledge which includes method, which when applied enables him to convey lines of poetry, specifically Homeric poetry, to an audience and make them feel fear, pity, joy, whatever the poet intended, although what the poet intended is interpreted by the rhapsode. It is actually stated by Io at one point in the dialogue that this is what he aims at. He says explicitly that he wouldn't make his money if his audience is laughing when they are supposed to be crying. If his audience is laughing at that time, then he's crying. However, he does seem to have a confusion common to most people of the time that a poet also has knowledge. This idea arises from the weight of tradition, and some people have the idea that the poets are actually divinely inspired and therefore have knowledge given to them from the gods. It doesn't really matter how Io thinks the knowledge has been acquired, but he thinks that because he knows all of these thousands of Homeric lines, he understands what Homer is saying, and in a way he does understand, insofar as a rhapsode would understand poetic vocabulary. However, as Socrates makes it clear to Io eventually, by asking him time after time who would be a better judge of anything that Homer says, even Io says that the specialist would know better than a rhapsode. And Socrates continues until it seems that there is no techne left for the rhapsode, having gone through professions like the physician, the sea captain, the fisherman. Io does try to express what he means by knowing how to convey what the various people in the Homeric poems say, such as a slave, a woman, or a man, but Socrates ruins this attempt by giving these various types of people techne. Even the slave is an ox driver. The woman knows how to spin wool. Naturally, as with all techne, the specialist is a better judge of what Homer says than the rhapsode, precisely because the rhapsode is not a specialist. Socrates has somewhat sophistically been referring to these people as ruling their subject matter, and when they come to the man, it seems to Io that this is his last chance to save rhapsody as a techne. So he says that the man rules soldiers, so he's a strategos, he's a general, and he is the rhapsode. The rhapsode and the man, the strategos, have the same techne. He does this as a last-ditch attempt to save rhapsody as a profession with a techne. It should have been easy for Socrates to refute this philosophically simply by saying that one techne cannot serve two ends. One techne doesn't deal with leading an army and performing Homeric poetry for an audience. Instead, Socrates simply suggests that the Athenians would have chosen Io to be a general had he been considered a good general, but they haven't selected him as a general, therefore he isn't a general. This is a terrible argument, but Io seems to accept it. We might say that Socrates is being very unfair by pushing techne all the time which have subject matter. He's always talking about something said in Homer is better judged by a specialist than by the rhapsode. But this isn't the point of the techne of the rhapsode. Now, we might say Socrates is being unfair, but on the other hand, it should have caused Io to think what the techne of a rhapsode really is, and he should have said that it doesn't matter what is actually said, but how it is said. I suggest that this doesn't occur to him because he is a bit confused about what a rhapsode understands about Homer and his poetry. He does think that a rhapsode understands subject matter in some way. So he's at a loss how to defend against this obvious line of attack from Socrates. We may conclude that Socrates is being dialectical in a way. He is trying to make Io think for himself, but he's not making it all that easy. Also, Socrates is performing himself like a sophist. He forces the three analogies about divine inspiration onto Io, although Io himself refuses to believe this nonsense. We may also note that most of the questions about techne are eristic, this or that, one option or one other option, never more than one option, while Io should have chosen a third option. We should also note the end of the dialogue, where despite what Io had said earlier, that he doesn't believe that the explanation of divine inspiration is any good, Socrates forces him at the end to accept that he does have divine inspiration. And this is done by, again, two options. Either Io is being unjust because he isn't telling Socrates what he promised to tell him. In other words, he's hiding information. Or, in fact, he doesn't have information because he is divinely inspired. And Socrates offers him the choice. Either he should be considered to be divinely inspired, or he should be considered unjust. Given those two options, Io prefers to be considered divinely inspired. This is no way to prove that a rhapsode is divinely inspired. This is no way to prove that a rhapsode has no intelligence and no techne. Even worse, when we think about it, Io and Socrates are alone. Io says what he says at the end of the dialogue to satisfy Socrates. Io himself has no reason to have been persuaded by Socrates. He will continue to believe that he does understand Homer, that he has some inner understanding of the poetry which he can explain to an audience. And this suits very well a Platonic dialogue, because the characters are models. They are not expected to change during the dialogue.